The prevailing sentiment in the gaming industry is that we need less sequels and more games based on new IPs. While I partially agree with this sentiment, today I want to show you how a well-crafted sequel can hold as much, if not more, value than a completely new title. I could use many games as examples: Assassin's Creed 2, Saints Row 2, Uncharted 2, even The Witcher 3. These are all games that we'll probably talk about at some point in the future, but today I want to specifically focus on the Alan Wake franchise as an example. And what better place to begin than with the first Alan Wake. Let's check it out. Before delving into the plot, it's crucial to analyze the gameplay of Alan Wake. Alan Wake is an adventure game with a lot of horror aspects. Players are presented with the task of surviving against the Taken, who are humans corrupted by the darkness. The Taken have a protective shield that prevents bullets from initially being effective. However, they're vulnerable to light, so the player must first aim a flashlight at the Taken for a few seconds before engaging them with their weapons. At first, this is an interesting concept. If we disregard Alone in the Dark illumination, and believe me we will, no other game has attempted a gameplay mechanic quite like Alan Wake's. The novelty of the gameplay extends to its controls as the player uses the flashlight with L2 and aims his weapon with the right stick, which was a lot more intuitive than I expected. Unfortunately, the positive aspects of the gameplay end here. While Alan Wake's gameplay is very original, its execution leaves much to be desired. Although the gameplay seems interesting at first, the game shows everything it has to offer to the player in its first 30 minutes and never evolves beyond its initial premise. Throughout the entire game, players will aim their flashlight at a Taken for a few seconds and then shoot them as many times as needed. And inexplicably, the game requires a set number of bullets for each enemy to be defeated. For instance, Wicked Taken consistently required 2 pistol bullets to be eliminated, regardless of where the bullets land or the player's proximity to them. But why does this matter? Take the Resident Evil games for example. In those games, the zombies don't require a set number of bullets to be killed, instead, factors such as shot placement and proximity determine the effectiveness of each shot. This dynamic approach heightens a sense of terror, leaving players uncertain about the ammo required for their next battle and immersing them in their fight for survival. If Resident Evil makes you feel like you're in a battle for survival, Alan Wake makes you feel like you're a production line worker. The gameplay is so predictable that it quickly becomes boring, and Alan Wake fails to alleviate this issue with its limited offerings. The game boasts few weapons and even fewer enemy types. On their adventure, the player will have to fight regular Taken, larger Taken with a chainsaw, and annoying Taken. The annoying Taken can become invisible and do not allow the player to target them with his flashlight. Look, I very much believe that in gaming there is a very fine line between something being scary and something being annoying. The game requiring the player to constantly point his flashlight at things, which in itself quickly becomes tedious, is one thing, but introducing an enemy that makes the already boring gameplay even worse is where I draw the line. I don't doubt that this would actually be scary in real life, but chasing someone with a flashlight in the middle of the night is not interesting gameplay. At least Remedy, knowing just how enjoyable it is to fight these types of enemies, introduces 2 other types of enemies with very similar functionality to the aforementioned Taken. The player also encounters crows that attack him at regular intervals and then fly far enough away to be out of the flashlight's range, as well as random inanimate objects. And these enemies may seem kind of scary the first time the player encounters them, but they quickly become tiresome within a playthrough. If there's one thing that elevates the overall experience, it's the general atmosphere of the game. Alan Wake excels in keeping players on edge with meticulously crafted forest environments that exude a sense of dread. The game is oddly scarier when there are no Taken on the player screen, as the lighting, sound design, and level design all combine to create a very creepy atmosphere. It's a shame that the game undermines this atmosphere every time a Taken appears. For some inexplicable reason, every time an enemy appears, the game goes into slow motion and pans the player's camera towards the newly spawned foes. The only thing missing is a neon sign above them. I don't understand why Alan Wake chooses this method, as it does a good job of alerting the player to the presence of enemies using other audiovisual cues. and this leaves Alan Wake's gameplay in an unusual state. Even 13 years after its release, it still has one of the best atmospheres I've seen in a game, but all of that is quickly forgotten when the gameplay is boring or annoying. I saved discussing the driving segments for last. Alan Wake was released 7 years after Remedy's previous game, Max Payne 2. During the development process, Alan Wake was originally intended to be an open world game. Somewhere along the way, this changed, but remnants of the original direction of the game can still be found in the title. Firstly, although the game is extremely linear, the world feels massive, with some vast forest serving as the backdrop for the protagonist's adventures. The other way we can see that the game was once open world is the points in the game where you have to drive from one area to another. On its own, driving is relatively lackluster. The car handling is functional but not particularly satisfying, and the roads are largely empty. Compared to the rest of the game though, driving was a moment of relief for me. Not because Alan Wake is scary, but because it meant that for a while, I wouldn't have to play the rest of the game. Unlike the gameplay, the plot is quite interesting. Particularly, its first 20 minutes are masterfully crafted, captivating players' attention and leaving them eager to uncover what happens next. In the game, you control Alan Wake, a renowned author of crime novels who hasn't written anything in 2 years due to a mental block. To solve this issue, Alan's wife organizes a getaway for the couple to a small Washington town known as Bright Falls. After getting their keys from a very suspicious old lady, the couple arrives at the cabin where they will be staying. They immediately fight because Alan's wife has the audacity to suggest he resume work after 2 years of doing nothing, with Alan storming out in frustration. But before he can leave, Alan hears his wife screaming, so he returns to the cabin and in order to save her, dives into the lake where she had fallen. The screen fades to black and shortly afterward we see Alan waking up alone in a wrecked car. If you want to create intrigue, this is how you start a game. The game's introduction is fantastic at creating questions that the player wants to know the answer to. From here on out, the plot is divided into 2 main threads: the search for Alan's wife, and the pages of a book he finds in random places during his search for her. Let's start with the second thread. During the course of the plot, Alan stumbles upon several scattered pages from a book that appears to have been written by him, but he doesn't remember doing so. And not only does he not remember writing it, but these pages seem to be able to predict the future. This is where the plot takes a misstep. The game swiftly confirms the predictive nature of these pages, yet fails to leverage this revelation in a compelling way. The reason behind this is that the devs wanted these pages to be one of the game's collectibles. This means that the devs couldn't know which pages players would find and collect, so they couldn't craft a more engaging narrative around them. Let me give you an example. Somewhere in the middle of the plot, the player finds a page that mentions that Alan will soon encounter objects controlled by the darkness. Alan reads this page and doesn't comment on it, and when he encounters these objects 5 minutes later, he doesn't even mention that the page he found foretold the future in his internal monologue. I feel like the use of the pages is a missed opportunity for Alan Wake. There are so many things you can do with this very interesting idea, but I feel as if the plot is refusing to use it. The other thread of the plot is the search for Alan's wife. In it, Alan goes to various parts of the town, mostly forests, in a seemingly hopeless attempt to unite with his wife. This effort is filled with revelations, well-executed twists, and a mediocre attempt at comedy, mostly emanating from Alan's manager. This aspect of the plot was what kept me engaged until the end, thanks to its excellent introduction, strong performances, and the consistent revelations that unfolded throughout the game. However, I believe that a significant portion of the plot wouldn't have unfolded as it did if the characters weren't part of a horror game. The game very quickly confirms that the Taken's weakness is light and that they can only come out at night. So for some reason, Alan searches for his wife exclusively at night. Why does he do this? Because otherwise half of the game wouldn't exist. There's literally a moment in the plot where someone calls Alan, tells him he's got his wife, and to meet him at a place in the morning. Alan goes there in the morning, finds no one, and waits until night to go looking for him. So Alan waited 6 to 12 hours to make sure the player will have gameplay when he goes back out into the woods. It's moments like these that ruin the player's immersion, and it's a shame because the plot itself is quite interesting. Towards the end of the game, Alan learns that the darkness abducted him when he jumped into the lake to save his wife, and had him write a book that would allow the darkness to take over the world. However, Alan managed to escape before completing the manuscript. Upon learning this, Alan climbs to the top of the local mountain and fires 3 flares to defeat the darkness. The story ends with Alan writing the end of the book, where he trades places with his wife, which allows her to return to the normal world, but he surrenders himself to the dark place, a place outside the normal world that will act as his prison. An interesting ending to a strong plot. Overall, I feel that what characterizes the first Alan Wake is that it definitely had a lot of potential, which is never reached. Whether it's because of the budget, the technology available at the time, development issues, or a combination of all those things, Alan Wake could have been so much better. I played Alan Wake shortly before the release of its sequel, and it initially made me not want to play Alan Wake 2. I thought that maybe Sam Lake's games just weren't for me because Control hadn't impressed me either. But after seeing the enthusiasm of literally everyone who played Alan Wake 2, I decided to give Remedy another chance. And this is where the power of a sequel can be fully demonstrated, because Alan Wake 2 takes everything the first Alan Wake tried and executes it flawlessly. The gameplay of Alan Wake 2 is very similar to that of the first title in the series, but with some significant changes and additions. One of the most notable alterations is the introduction of 2 distinct playable characters, Alan, still trapped in the dark place, and Saga Anderson, an FBI agent investigating a cult-related murder spree. These 2 characters have 2 quite different gameplay loops. Saga's gameplay follows a traditional survival horror format. The ammo you have is limited, you need to manage your inventory, and you spend most of your time searching for items in a certain ominous area to solve some strange puzzle. Similar to the first Alan Wake, the Taken are vulnerable to light. What has changed though is the amount of light exposure required to weaken a Taken before it can be damaged by bullets. In Alan Wake 1, enemy strength was indicated by how long you had to point the flashlight at them. Weaker Taken would become weak after 1 to 2 seconds of exposure to light, while stronger Taken required around 10 to 15 seconds. Once weakened, they could easily be killed with a few bullets. Pointing a flashlight at someone for 10 seconds is as fun as it sounds, which is not at all. So Alan Wake 2 does the logical thing and reverses the roles of the flashlight and ammo. Now all Taken have roughly the same sensitivity to light, but depending on how strong they are, they need the appropriate amount of bullets to be defeated. It's an extremely logical solution to a problem that should have never existed, and it makes the gameplay scarier and more enjoyable. Remember in Alan Wake 1 when I said that each Taken had a predetermined number of bullets in order to be defeated, making the gameplay very predictable? Now that's no longer an issue because the game handles the Taken's vitality similar to Resident Evil. And while all these may seem like minor tweaks, they make a huge difference to the end result. In general, Alan Wake 2 represents a significant upgrade in terms of gameplay compared to its predecessor. With a clearer vision of the game they wanted to create, Remedy delivers fantastic level design that keeps players constantly engaged and on their toes. The gameplay also introduces a new addition, a case-solving board. While playing as Saga, players can pause the game at any time to provide solutions to the questions encountered so far. The execution of this gameplay mechanic is not great. Instead of testing the player's mind, players can simply brute force the answer. However, you're not forced to engage with the mechanic, and the game will automatically resolve many of the questions as the plot progresses. Personally, I found myself using this mechanic whenever I needed a break from the occasionally stifling atmosphere of Alan Wake 2. When it comes to the game's atmosphere, it excels in its intended purpose. Through a combination of lighting, sound design, character design for the enemies, and various other elements, Alan Wake 2 stands out as one of the most terrifying games I've experienced. Particularly noteworthy is a jumpscare in the nursing home that actually made me stop playing the game for a few hours. If you've played the game, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everything I've mentioned so far pertains to the gameplay when controlling Saga. Alan's gameplay is quite different and I don't know exactly how to describe it. Alan's trapped in the dark place and he must navigate through various surreal locations that mess with the player's head. What sets Alan's gameplay apart is his ability to write a book that not only predicts the future, but also alters the present. So if Alan finds himself at a point where he can't proceed any further, he alters the story to his advantage. This is definitely something that is easier to understand in practice. So Alan's gameplay is much more about exploration than combat. There are a lot of taking in the levels you play as Alan, but the player quickly realizes that it's both not in their best interest to fight them all, and that the taking of the Dark Place are much more passive. Players will explore various eerie locales, such as abandoned cinemas, hotels, and subway lines. Despite them being very different from one another, I found both gameplay loops very fun and engaging. Of course, this was undoubtedly helped by the game's captivating plot. Like its gameplay, the plot of Alan Wake 2 is divided between Alan's story and Saga's story. Saga arrives in Bright Falls to investigate a series of murders carried out by a cult, seemingly in service of some perverse ritual. In this mission, she is assisted by her partner, Alex Casey. Alex Casey is essentially Max Payne in all but name, who Remedy no longer owned the rights to. He has the face of Sam Lake, akin to Max Payne 1, as well as the amazing voice of James McCaffrey. We'll delve deeper into Casey's role in the plot shortly, but I want to focus on McCaffrey. McCaffrey tragically passed away shortly after the release of Alan Wake 2, and this is probably the last time we'll hear his voice. His legacy remains an indelible part of gaming history. I want to dedicate this short part of the video by noting that James McCaffrey made every video game he was involved in better with his voice, and Alan Wake 2 is no exception. McAfee delivers a captivating performance as Alex Casey, and we'll discuss his involvement in the plot more when we get to Alan. Returning to Saga, her adventure quickly takes on a supernatural tone. She encounters an increasing amount of Taken, and of course, finds pages from a book that can predict the future. This time, however, the plot does use the pages in a much better way. Saga uses the pages to look for clues that will bring her closer to solving the mystery. And not only does she use them to get closer to the identity of the killers, but she also uses them to prepare for upcoming battles. A prime example of this is midway through the plot, where Saga finds a page that says that after she climbs a ladder, she will be attacked by a Taken. So Saga, after reading this page, when she does find a ladder, tells herself to prepare for battle. This is literally one line of dialogue that immensely helps the immersion of the player into the game's world. It shows us that Saga is a resourceful person who uses whatever means she can to deal with a supernatural threat. And finally, the characters don't wait until nighttime to do anything. Normally the Taken wouldn't be able to attack the player in the morning. Alan Wake 2 solves this issue by making the darkness have control over the weather. This not only portrays the characters as more intelligent, but also makes the enemy even scarier. But that's not all. The darkness also has the power to change the present and the past. Because of this, Saga sees her family life fall apart and is in a constant struggle against time to save her loved ones. This is the reason why Saga's story is so interesting. On the flip side, Alan's narrative unfolds within the confines of the Dark Place, where he has been trapped in a never-ending loop for 13 years. Alan is trying to escape this place and draws inspiration from an Alex Casey adventure to write his own book that will allow him to return to the normal world. The segments of the plot involving Alan are truly unique. What's important to know is that there is an evil doppelganger of Alan on Earth who wants to carry out the Darkness's plan to take over the world. Alan's story is very different from what we're used to in gaming. The game messes with the player's head in a way that never lets them feel comfortable. Very few game plots have captivated my attention to the extent that Alan Wake 2's narrative has. Whether we're talking about the unique use of various audiovisual elements or the game's writing, Alan Wake 2 is one of the most interesting games I've played. Because I want to talk about spoilers and the game has only been out for a few months, if you don't want spoilers for Alan Wake 2, you can skip ahead to the next chapter of the video now. The main reason I want to talk about spoilers is because the musical is one of the best levels I've played in a game. Throughout the plot, Alan Wake 2 uses a mix of gameplay and FMV scenes for its cutscene. The musical is the moment when these two worlds collide and the result is simply magical. The ending is also worth mentioning. During the plot, we learned that there was never a doppelganger of Alan, but that it was Alan himself who was possessed by darkness. In the plot's climax, Saga also goes to the Dark Place where she must kill Alan to stop the endless loop. After she does this, she calls her daughter on the phone, who at this point we don't know if she's alive, and the game rolls credits before we find out if she picked up the phone or not. For me, this ending is perfect. Up to that point, the plot resolves all of the player's questions, but leaves the most important one without a definite answer, similar to Inception. But there's another ending added with the game's new Game Plus mode. In it, Saga's daughter answers the phone and Alan, for some reason I don't understand, gets up like nothing happened. Now, I'm not saying this wasn't the ending I wanted, it was the reason I was playing the game, but I would have preferred if the ending had been left ambiguous. Although it serves as a rewarding conclusion for players who completed the New Game Plus mode, I believe the game's narrative impact would have been stronger if this alternate ending had not been included, at least not so soon after the initial release of the game. Overall, Alan Wake 2 is something unique and serves as a perfect example of the impact a sequel can have. Even as someone who was uncertain about Remedy's games until that point, I'm eagerly anticipating what Sam Lake and his team will deliver with their next title. And that was my analysis of the Alan Wake series and the importance of sequels in gaming. Click this video to find out the 10 worst games of all time, according to science. See you in the next one.